Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 49, is foundation paper piecing versus traditional piecing. Today, I'd like your opinion rather than my opinion. I've been seeing on Instagram and on YouTube videos bobbin chicken. What is bobbin chicken? From what I can see, you're not supposed to run out of bobbin thread. Well, how does that happen? When I put a bobbin into my machine, whether it's here, home, or on my long arm, I sew until the bobbin is empty. I use every bit of thread. Every time I put a bobbin in, it's going to run out at some point. Please let me know in the comments section what bobbin chicken is and why would you play it? Before we get to today's episode, I'd like to update you on the Scrap Fabric Challenge, the last quilt that we're piecing with all the rest of the leftover pieces. You had cut 5 1.5-inch squares for each block. You used one of the 1.5-inch squares to attach it to the 3.5 by 1.5-inch rectangle. So now, take the rest of your 1.5-inch squares, sew them together in twosies, then sew the twosies into foursies, so you have as many of these units as you need for as many blocks as you want to make. And if you get them all sewn together, you can start pressing them as well. Just press them all in one direction. It doesn't matter if they're up or they're down. Just press all of the seams in one direction, and then you will keep them in a baggie until they're ready to sew together. Thanks. Let's get to today's episode. Many blocks can be made with either foundation paper piecing or traditional piecing. All of these blocks here I've seen recently in videos being made using foundation paper piecing. Your regular square in a square, diamond in a rectangle or diamond Rex unit. I've shown you this recently. I've seen this made with foundation paper piecing. Here's another square in a square, but if you put another square around it, it becomes what they call an economy block, which is really just a square and a square and a square. And I would argue that it's more efficient to do these kind of blocks that can be made traditional piecing, much more efficient than doing it with foundation paper piecing. Let's review the differences. I have to switch out the boards. I'll be right back. In traditional piecing, you cut your pieces approximately to size. In many techniques, you oversize slightly and then trim down, and they have some very little waste. Oftentimes rulers, and when I say rulers, I don't mean just a regular rotary cutting ruler that we cut our strips with. You have to have those if you're a quilter. But the ruler type tools can help you trim down and get units that are perfectly sized and not cutting off any points because you have an accurate 1/4-inch seam allowance all the way around. Foundation paper piecing uses a lot more items, more things to do it. First of all, you generally use more fabric. Depending on your cutting, you usually have more waste. You use paper, you use ink, so there's more supplies here. And this is the biggest one for me, is the prep work. And we're going to show you shortly all the prep work that I do to do foundation paper piecing. And it really helps with success. Additionally, when you're using your tools to go through paper, you dull things. You dull your pins, you dull your rotary blades, you dull your needles. The only reason I didn't put scissors on there is almost everybody has paper scissors and fabric scissors. So you won't be dulling your fabric scissors on paper because quilters won't use them. They'll use their paper scissors on the paper. Now, for me, foundation paper piecing is to be used for things that cannot be traditionally pieced, because traditionally pieced, if you can, is a much better way to do it. Here's an example of something that cannot be traditionally pieced. This is from Mary Hertel's So Magical, and here's a unicorn. And this one goes up to the letter R, is for the number of sections in this piece. So if my numbers are right, if I can count correctly, that means that there's 18 different sections to this. There's tiny, tiny little pieces in here, and they're at all kinds of crazy angles, and that's how you get the foundation paper pieced look that you can't get any other way. So I'm going to show you on an example from this book of hers. What is it called again? So Cute Baby Animals. And I chose to do the turtle. And I ran into some things as I was making the turtle that I stopped sewing so that I could show you why I do all the prep work that I do to make this work. So let me walk around the table, and we have everything laid out over here that I can show you. The first thing I do when I'm going to make a foundation paper piece block, I make 3 copies of the pattern. I make 2 in color, and I make 1 in black and white. And I take one of the colors and I put it right away into a page protector. And that's what I refer to as I'm piecing, to make sure that I am piecing things in the correct order, and also to keep my colors straight. Now in this particular example, I followed these colors the same, but oftentimes I don't keep the colors the same. So say I decided to do this part brown, I would have to remember that the greens are browns. And if I made this red, I would have to remember the pink is red. But for today's example, I followed the colors the same. Then I take my second color copy and I cut it apart so that I have each piece separated and have a template for each shape I'm making. So I then put them in baggies into their correct letter. So you'll have an A bag, a B bag, and I have all the pieces separated and labeled. And then I take the black and white copy and I cut it apart, and then hopefully you can get it onto one sheet of paper like this is, but you don't want them together because you need the 1/4 inch seam allowance in between. So you have to separate them. So that I have each piece separated, I glued it onto a piece of cardstock, then I can take this to the copier and copy onto the paper that I'm going to piece on. I've told you before in previous episodes, I like using the vellum. Other people like newsprint, other people just want to use copy paper. Whatever you like, it will work. I just prefer the vellum. Next, I then take my fabric that I need for that particular unit. So let me grab, I have the G section laid out. Let me bring it to the camera. Next, as I piece each unit, I take that baggie, in this case I've got the G here, and this consists of 4 pieces. This is right here on the color copy. I've got 1 green leg and I've got 3 background pieces. So I take my fabric that I need for those pieces, I lay my template down, face down, there's number 1, which is this one here, and then 2, 3, and 4, they're all numbered, they go face down, and then I cut out the fabric using a 1/2 inch extra all the way around. Now if you've done foundation piecing before, you know that the first piece goes face up, let's see, do I have it the right way? There. And then you take your piece 2 and you sew, you put it right sides together. Is this one too? Yes. So right sides together and then flip back. So when you have the pieces cut at the right angle to start with, to me that sets you up for success. And I've got 2 examples to show you why I don't like the cut a jumbo piece of fabric, not in the correct shape with the correct angles, and lay it on there and just lop off the extra. That just never worked for me. And when I first started doing foundation paper piecing, I hated it because I never was able to cover the piece after you flipped it, the section it was supposed to cover. So let me show you those examples. Okay, the first example I'd like to show you is from the D section. This is the D section of this block. And I had sewn on the 1 and the 2 piece. And as we do, you fold this back, cut it at 1/4 inch, and then I take my pre-made piece with the angle lined up to the where we cut. And this is so counterintuitive. But once you sew it and you fold it back, it covers the entire area that it needs to cover. This is the issue I had when I was first foundation paper piecing. I would take a much larger piece than I need, and I would lay it on here thinking that once I sewed it and I flipped it back, it would be plenty big to cover the piece. And then once you sewed it, once you sew from here to here, between the 3 and the 4 piece, and then you flip it back, you've missed half of this piece. Now that's kind of an extreme example, but that's what used to happen to me. I might just miss a teeny bit of the corner here or here, but it was so frustrating. And what solved the problem is making these pieces the correct angle and a larger size, so once you sew and flip it back, it's perfect. Now the same thing happened again in the eye section. The eye section is over here. It's only 3 pieces. Here's your first piece. Again, sticking way out. If you don't sew this at the right angle, you will not get your section covered. If you sew slightly like this, or even just off a little bit, you're going to miss this tip here. And that's why getting your angle set up correctly to start with helps you not have to rip and re-sew. This kind of foundation paper piecing is not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of pieces and there's a lot of tiny pieces. I don't know if you can see these tiny little number 2 and 3 in the E section, but they are minuscule. And for this kind of piecing, this is the only way to get the accuracy that this kind of piecing requires. So many times I've seen the foundation paper piecing being used for those units I showed you in the very beginning, the square and a square and the diamond Rex and the economy block, saying, well, you can use your scraps to make them. Well, there's nothing that says you can't use your scraps to make them traditionally pieced. I grabbed scraps for my turtle. You can use scraps for foundation paper piecing, traditional piecing. You can use regular yardage for both too. Whatever you want to use will work. what I showed behind me here in the quilts is, to me, this is a scrap quilt where you sew all your leftover pieces together and make a quilt. You don't need to do any foundation paper piecing to sew all your scraps together to make a quilt. Here is the Mary Hertel's book, Sew Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, where these are all foundation paper pieced. And you've seen the tree and the candy cane before because I made hot pads for Christmas out of them. But you can't do this, to me, any way that I know of, any other way. So I hope that you will choose I shouldn't say correct. I should say the most efficient way for you to make the blocks the way you want to make them. If after this you've decided you still want to use foundation paper piecing for economy blocks or square and a square, by all means go for it. I don't want to waste the paper. I don't want to use the ink. I don't want to have to pull out the papers. It's just more work that you don't need to do. But if you want really intricate, beautifully pieced pictures like Mary Hertel does, foundation paper piecing is the only way to do it, and the only way to make it easy is to do all the prep work. That's my episode today. If you liked this episode, please share, like, and subscribe. And until next time, happy sewing.